Hello, everybody. This is an unusual episode of Serial Talk, where we are interviewing someone, I think in English for the first time ever. Um, I want to welcome Matt Cohn, the Senior Technical Leader of the Office of President at Shopify. Matt, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to see you. We saw you in Japan a few months ago, and you were kind of visiting different companies, maybe partially on vacation. But can you give a quick intro about yourself and your role at Shopify?
Yeah, absolutely. Firstly, it was a pleasure getting to spend some time with you in Tokyo. I'm counting down the days until I get to go back to the region. So,
You have to
I
come
mean,
back
it's
again.
hard to top that first trip there. But yeah, a little bit about myself. I formerly before Shopify was on the brand side, so I was at Spin Master, which was a
Hmm.
toy company behind Paw Patrol and several of the those household preschool brand names. I've been at Shopify for nearly 7 years now, and I report into our president. And really, what that means is every day looks different for me. But serving millions of brands and customers on Shopify, really my time is kind of spent as a floating resource, working closely with all of the teams that make up our organization. And whether that's of course our executive team, our product team, our sales, solution engineering, and success teams. Really, where I play a role is speaking with brands. I've spent a lot of time with enterprise brands in particular, but we have a saying at Shopify: "Make commerce better for everyone." So whether it's someone getting started in their garage or all the way up to the butcher boxes of the world, really, what I'm spending a lot of time doing is trying to get a pulse on where retail and commerce is at in general. And again, spanning a very large spectrum, whether it's small all the way to enterprise, everything else in between. Just trying to help all areas of the merchant base, but of course internal teams as well.
What does it mean specifically when you kind of have to kind of navigate through all these different teams? And Shopify is such a big company now, and it has so many different categories that you have to kind of look after. Like, do you kind of pick and choose the priorities based on the priorities of the company? Is it like everything kind of comes at you, and you have to kind of take out all the fires? Or like what's the day-to-day like?
Yeah, I wear many, many, many hats. I'd say a lot of it comes at me, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. I think it's a lot of context switching because with an
Mm,
enterprise, for example, their needs naturally are going to be in many ways different from smaller organizations, all else being equal. But I think what a lot of it is if you take the size of the organization out of the equation, I think what a lot of it is ultimately advocating. So it's
mm,
you know the challenge is it's for me it's speaking with brands of all different sizes and verticals and flavors and business models too, right? Because there's direct to consumer, there's retail, there's b2b, there's agentic selling, there's social selling, there's mobile apps, there's raffle. Like there's so many different, as I like to say, flavors of commerce that I'd say the reality and the challenge in the role is when I get a piece of feedback from a given merchant, I need to delineate, is this a signal of the market or is this a one-off, right? Because
right.
at the end of the day, when I'm, to answer your question head on, when I'm working internally to, make create awareness and shed light on feedback that I'm hearing in the market, there's a big difference between this is a signal of something that a greater, larger, merchant base can benefit from, or if it is an anomaly. Either way, we want to solve the problem. But obviously, that
Right.
drastically shifts the course in terms of how we interact with our product teams, our go to market teams, and all the different folks that make up Shopify.
Got it. And then as kind of a liaison between kind of brands and kind of the executive team of Shopify, but also all the other kind of departments within it. What kind of brands have you worked with yourself, and what has been the experience like?
Yeah, I've worked with everyone under the sun. I feel like I've worked with ButcherBox, who I know you both are familiar with. So
Yep.
meat subscription business, lovely, lovely folks. I've worked with Carrier, so in the B2B space, so it's a little bit of
Hmm.
a different look. And if anything, really a testament to Shopify's investment in the enterprise space. Spanx, Staples.
Hmm.
So again, from
Wow.
shapewear to consumer goods. If it's on Shopify, odds are I've had some. Mind you, I have
Right.
millions of brands, but I've had my experience across the different verticals. That's for sure.
Amazing. And Shopify is obviously the core focus has always been kind of on the mom and pops, the smaller brands, and then more recently kind of D2C brands as well. And then now I think there's a real shift to focusing also on enterprise customers. In terms of you've talked to a lot of these brands. What are kind of the key challenges that they face, one in switching to Shopify, but also that they currently face today that Shopify can actually solve?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think if we were to hone in on the enterprise segment in particular, I think the challenge is at the same time the opportunity, right? Because it's
Mhm.
one thing for Shopify to have product and service that solves a lot of their historical needs, but I think for these enterprises that are coming from, again, whether it's a another SaaS platform or homegrown, we see both, right? It's an opportunity to rewrite their history and to
Mhm.
rewrite the trajectory of the future growth of the business, if without being too dramatic, and to kind of zoom in a little bit, if we get tactical here, I think whether it's, again, having homegrown solutions that are kind of stitched together by folks who have tribal knowledge, or maybe it's just bloated systems and tech architecture with a surplus of ERPs and middlewares and
Mhm.
microservices. Oftentimes, and again, don't want to make a generalization, but oftentimes there's an over-engineered effort, and I think that's where, again, taking my sales hat off, but just being so passionate about Shopify and believing in the mission, I think where a lot of value has been had with the platform is the simplicity of it, and really leaning into Shopify as that broker to all things commerce, right? So as I mentioned before, it's we're not an e-commerce platform or a commerce operating system, and there's many different flavors of not only Shopify, of business models. And I think the the challenge is that a lot of businesses have built themselves into almost like a pigeonholed position where what got them here won't necessarily get them there, right?
Mhm.
So you take a 20-year-old company, maybe predominantly they were a D2C company, and they built their tech around this business model. Well, guess what?
Right.
Buyer behaviors have changed, consumer sentiment and demands have changed, and expectations have changed. And so if they're supposed to cast a wider net and be have a presence, a breadth of presence that meets customers where they are, well, if they don't have the technology to actually meet that consumer expectation, that's going to obviously pay negative dividends in their ability to connect, acquire, convert, and maintain a lifetime value with those customers. And so it's a long-winded way of saying that I think the opportunities to streamline and retire a lot of the tech debt, but also just future-proof their businesses and lean on
Mhm.
something like a SaaS model that's going to allow them to spread their wings.
Yeah, and I think another point to this that I think Webb Smith from 2PM recently talked about was this idea that I think in the past you saw this kind of wave of brands that implemented their own kind of engineering systems and kind of made it kind of very customized, and so it was like it was incredible at that moment. And I think, and during at that time, they had kind of promised that they would be able to kind of figure out everything, and everything would be kind of compartmentalized and be able to kind of be like easily switched out. And I think a lot of companies have found that to actually be very difficult. And I think one of the things with Shopify is you guys are experts at this, at building kind of infrastructure so that brands don't have to worry, right? And so you have the base level kind of Shopify, and then you have the app ecosystem on top of it where you can actually customize through there and kind of figure out how to differentiate. So I think like that's there's kind of a shift, I think, of people who are very very customized and building out their own engineering teams, and maybe now it's a little bit less of a need.
There's definitely a shift, and it's a fabulous point you make, because I think the other thing too, and almost a misconception, is that Shopify, although I classify it in many ways as the beating hearts or brain of an organization, it's in true enterprise fashion. It's not meant to take over 100% of the entirety of your tech stack. And again, I say there's different flavors of Shopify and that's just my personal take on how we fit in terms of business models, but there's also in terms of tech stacks, in the sense of you can choose as an organization. If you look at your tech stack, I almost look at it like Lego pieces or Tetris. You can
Mhm.
choose if you would like for Shopify to take up a bigger piece of the pie. But the beauty of what we've built, being an API first platform, is that like you may have specific business requirements that necessitate you to have custom built proprietary software. and that interoperates harmoniously with Shopify. And that's the beauty of it, is that it's not an either or. It's a, hey, how do we make it fit into this larger scheme, but allow you to take advantage of some of these benefits that will keep you nimble and keep you at the forefront of where customers are. Not to mention just all of the performance gains, infrastructure benefits, power of Shop Pay, and etc.
Yeah, and as as Shopify, caters more to the needs of enterprise customers, I think you guys are adding a lot of additional functionality. One of the things I think that often there's a lot of enterprise customers worry about is kind of this idea of a unified customer data solution, right? Where they're worried that they have so many different channels, they work on so many different things that all the data are siloed in different places. And I think I'm assuming some of the customers now on Shopify are actually switching to you guys partially because you guys have Shopify POS. There's all these different pieces that you can put together to be this kind of central data repository almost.
100%. And like I said before, I think, again, having been at Shopify for the last nearly 7 years now, I've personally seen the shift of building the primitives brick by brick, the layers, the foundation from a data model standpoint, where you have retail, brick and mortar, you've got B2B, you've got D2C. Those are three core pillars that are all built on the same customer order product information. And the reality that you don't, not only do you not have to have disparate systems, but that you don't have to be on the hook and maintain the overhead of the integrations, and you can just almost have that data ping pong between the different commerce surface areas, and just I don't want to say take it for granted, but just have that be your baseline is game changing. And you're absolutely right. That's a lot of reason, or that's a primary motivating factor that brands have made the leap to come to Shopify. What I would argue though is, taking a step back. You may have a brand that has no intention of ever selling wholesale or
Mm.
retail. Maybe they're just like a D2C driven business. That's what brought them to the dance, and that's what they continue to want to lean into. I think that, even as we look forward to the future of what commerce looks like, this idea that you're going to achieve economies of scale by having that data unified holds true. I think that's a universally applicable statement,
Hmm.
regardless of what your channel mix looks like, right?
Right.
So obviously, I'm sure on every podcast you've had, without fail, you've had some mention of AI and agentic selling, right? And so
Right.
the same holds true as we're expanding into these surfaces like Perplexity, or maybe it's the Roblox integration that we recently announced.
Hmm.
Whatever that shape looks like for you, if it's maybe selling on Meta and D2C, you're going to receive the fruits of your labor by having that all under one roof. And so I think that's where a lot of brands are seeing benefit, because ultimately it allows them to reduce clutter and connect to their customer in a more streamlined way.
Right. And I think this is why the Shopify API first strategy makes total sense. And this is also your entry point into a lot of different enterprise customers, right? It's not through, you're not you can obviously sell the whole package, but oftentimes I'm assuming a lot of brands start off with a single piece of the Shopify platform and then start kind of integrating more and more onto it as well. So I think, this strategy makes a lot of sense in terms of like what to build for enterprise customers, especially now. What has been kind of the talk, within Shopify about like what to prioritize, how to figure out what are the kind of biggest needs of these enterprise customers.
How much time you got? I want to say everything, literally everything, and I think that's really what kind of popped into my head when you asked the initial question of like, what do you do on a day to day basis? I think, having spent a lot of my time, I think more than half of my Shopify journey in the enterprise space, um, there's so many asks that come from enterprise, and again, these are things, we have a saying at Shopify, make the important things easy, make everything else possible. And I think,
Mhm.
again, going like coinciding with that API first approach, I think that plays really well into the enterprise landscape, because it's like, in true enterprise fashion, as I mentioned before, you may intentionally want to have a subset of your tech stack be custom built, right?
Right.
But then you want to have, it's all about, for each brand in particular, achieving the perfect mix of what we call build versus buy, right? And I think that there's kind of three pillars to that. This goes back to your question of like, how do we prioritize what to build? There's kind of three pillars of this, which is Shopify native, the app
Mhm.
ecosystem, and then custom build. And the beauty of it is that it all rolls up under our APIs. I think subscriptions is a great example. We have enterprise grade brands that are using Recharge or Order Groove. We have
Mhm.
brands that have built custom subscription apps. We
Right.
even have brands that are pretty significant that leverage our first party app as well. And so that's I think it's tough for me to say that there's a certain area or subset of the platform that we're prioritizing, because I think we have enough folks in R&D, and that's really the
Mhm.
magic of Shopify, that we have thousands of folks that are just building every single day. I mean, it's evident from additions. So I wouldn't say that we're prioritizing one area over another. I think we're just kind of full speed ahead. The question is more so, um, how are we aligning with our partner ecosystem in a way where it makes sense strategically for us to invest in certain things natively for our brands versus investing
Mm.
in the APIs to unlock those use cases, because we feel it makes sense for them to achieve it either via a custom app or other solutions that we still ultimately power. And again, that's not something that is made in silo. That is a conscious effort of our product organizations, meeting with customers, being in the field, gathering that data at scale, and ultimately doing what's best for our brands.
Makes sense. In terms of disregarding Shopify for a second, you've talked and worked with a lot of different brands, and obviously you worked at Spin Master as well. Um, in terms of brands that let's say are around like eight figure revenue, right? They're growing really quickly. Um, you know, and they're kind of aiming for that $1 billion revenue mark. They want to keep growing. What are some of the most common mistakes that you've seen kind of brands make at that size that are trying to grow to that $1 billion brand?
Yeah, and I've worked with a lot of them. I'd say, it's funny. I feel like we've spent a lot of the time today already talking about like the tech stack complexity. So I'd say the first one is complexity creep. I think it is of the
Mm.
utmost importance to get your house in order and to think two steps ahead. So
Can can
you
you
know,
can
you're
you give can you give can you give a quick kind of explanation about what complexity creep is?
Yeah, I mean it's over engineering yourself and not looking, and I was going to say not looking two steps ahead. So I think
Hmm.
it's building for where you are now versus building for the future. And you can make the argument that it goes both ways, because there's kind of two versions of complexity creep. One is you've over engineered yourself today based on the problems that are right in front of you. And so then when you
Mm.
scale, those systems break, and then you have to reverse engineer everything. But then what you've built breaks. So then it's kind of like you're stuck between a rock and a hard place, because it's like, well, I don't want to have a negative bottom line because I've over engineered myself, but
Right.
I need to take necessary action in order to get to the next step. The other version of risk of complexity creep, though, is when you do look ahead, but you've built for you you over anticipated what you think you need to build for, and
Mm.
so your investment has outsized the reality of the benefits that you're going to receive, right? And so I
Interesting.
think that it's not necessarily something that happens on Shopify a lot, because of our ecosystem. Typically it's something that in almost all cases it's a light lift. Like there's a way to go about it without breaking the bank. It's
Right.
mostly on the when I'm having conversations with customers who are not on Shopify that are thinking about Shopify, or maybe just I'm at a networking event, I'm chatting with folks in the retail space, and it's like we spent X amount of millions of dollars to build a loyalty program. I'm like, with all due respect, there's for a fraction of the cost you can achieve the same thing. So
Right.
I'd say that's complexity creep. I think the other thing I'll call out quickly, would love to get your perspective though, is discounting. So I think
Mm.
in many ways, a lot of brands have made this mistake. I would say more so and I feel like we might have talked about this when I was in Japan, but in the
Yeah.
era of like 2010 to 2020, when it was kind of a free for all in the ad space, it was just like a race to the bottom of like, how many customers can I acquire? And I think there's this new level of sophistication and nuance now with like 14.5, the death of third party cookies, and like how important LTV is and how sacred it is, that you really have to be careful about consumer expectation and
Mm.
how they interact with your brand. Because if you lead with too aggressive discounting and set that as the norm, what I found is, yes, the obvious answer is that like they're more likely to leave you if you pull that from them. The other thing is the ripple effect, where they're
Mhm.
telling five friends about your brand, and oh, look at this incredible lucrative deal I got. Look how much
Right.
of an incredible value exchange there is. But then it's anticlimactic, and it's troublesome because these customers come through the door. You think it's organic, word of mouth, only to find out that they're largely disappointed. So it has a negative impact long term.
That's a really interesting point, because I think most people, when they think about kind of discounts, they think about kind of like long term value of that specific customer. But to your point, they're gonna tell their five friends that this company has like a 50% discount on something, and then all of them are gonna come in organically, but want the 50% discount. And so there's a much bigger effect that you see on companies. I wanna get back to your point about the complexity creep, because I think this is pretty important. And I think it might be even more important now with all these advances in AI, where how do brands kind of figure out what to build, what not to build, what to use on Shopify, especially when tomorrow OpenAI might release a feature, or some other company might release a feature that essentially negates everything, all the building that you've done on, let's say, like an image generation, for your products, for example, right? So like all these different things, how working with brands, how have they kind of adjusted to this environment?
It's a great question. I remember when my foray in the ecom space, again, was on the brand side, and even though it was, in the 2010s, it was still oddly felt like it was like early-ish days in SEO, even though the internet has far preceded the 2010s. But my point is that this AI boom is very reminiscent of that phase, and the reason I bring that up is because I think it's, you know a lot of brands are approaching this in a lot of different ways. And a lot of brands are looking to us saying, hey, as a resident expert in commerce, like, how do we sequence this? What tooling do we use? Do we how do we enable our teams? Like, is this an internal effort? Do we outsource it to a partner? How specific does it have to be to our workflows and our tooling and our software? And I think at a high level, and I'll kind of drill down into more specifics, you mentioned, um, like, the root of your question is to avoid complexity creep. Like, what's at a high level, like, how do you thematically as an organization think about AI adoption,
Right,
to achieve longevity, right?
right.
And to not like make that same mistake of like building yourself into a pigeonhole, or pigeonholing yourself into a box. I think that it's high level, it's a little bit of all of the above. So like
Mm-hmm.
there's public facing AI tooling that at an individual contributor level makes sense to leverage. That is job specific, right? I think there's a lot of tooling in Shopify, and I don't want to necessarily hone in on Shopify, but I think the reality is that, like, choose a PIM, choose a marketing platform, choose whatever piece of SaaS you're using. I think we're all obviously leaning into AI. I think
Mm-hmm.
Shopify has done a wonderful job of, if you look at what Shopify is for the vast majority of brands that use it. Again, like I said, it's a beating heart. It's the brain of an organization. The inherent advantage to that is that we actually have the unique privilege to radically transform the way that almost everybody, if not the entirety of the organization, does their jobs. So
Mm-hmm.
everyone from a marketer to a developer to a merchandiser to a data analyst to an engineer, you name it, we've built tooling that augments the work that they do. And so I think at the end of the day, again, don't want to, like, this is not a call to action for Shopify, but the reality is that I think something like a Sidekick, for example,
Mm-hmm.
that is now agentic, that has hooks into all these different data primitives. We have firsthand in working with merchants have seen tremendous success in terms of, like, even using that as an enablement tool to transform the way that their own teams are doing things. And I'll pause in a moment, but I think it's really this thematic shift of moving from an imperative nature to a declarative nature, because we're at a moment in time with software, right? It's again even more dramatic than SEO, of course. It's this
Mm-hmm.
move, it's the shift from, instead of me doing the thing with software being idly available and responding to my demands, it's like, what is agentic AI? What is AI? It's literally being sophisticated enough as a piece of software to understand like, have the semantic understanding of what I'm looking to do, and I can have that goal oriented architecture in question, or inquiry in question, and just be hands off keyboard and let the software take the wheel for me. So I think, again, long-winded way of saying that I think there's a lot of tooling across the board outside of Shopify, but I think Shopify's played a tremendous job in brokering a lot of that not only the job transformation, but I would actually argue the enablement itself because of
Mhm.
how intuitive something is like a sidekick to interface with.
Yeah, and then I mean the other thing with like Sidekick and all these other AI tools is they have access to so much more data than a human can probably remember as well. And so to be able to kind of you can potentially onboard a lot more folks like employees who are new to the company just because they have access to all this information that they otherwise have to kind of manually search for. I think another thing with this AI kind of like adoption within companies that I think we were just talking about this idea of buy versus build, right? And I think a lot of companies now are kind of faced with this is just decision of maybe I can actually build it with tools like Lovable, with tools like Cursor, right? And so how do brands kind of delineate between buying something versus building something? Do they just kind of wait it out and see, or like what's kind of the response been so far?
Yeah, I think there's I would argue that this extends to all areas of software, not just like parts of Shopify, but I think
Right.
it comes down to value exchange internally of total cost of ownership versus ROI, which encompasses feature set, right?
Hmm.
Like, is it are you know you can create a custom, like, just to give you a few like very pointed examples. Um, PIMs. You can use a PIM off the shelf, or you can create a custom app. It depends on your requirements. If you want to do something really trivial that involves meta objects, meta fields, and stitch together product and variants internally in a very unique way, you you could go about it with a custom app. Are there tremendous upsides to PIMs in terms of like data cleanliness and omnichannel expansion and content workflows and all these different things? Absolutely. So it's never a one size fits all rule. I think when businesses are assessing whether to build versus buy, it comes down to how much overhead and how much cost. It's like, I would argue, more than the cost of building the thing itself. It's as the comp. There's so many different pieces of any given tech stack at this scale and
Hmm.
enterprise lens that it's like you're only as good as your weakest link. And sure,
Right.
like, we do our part as a platform of keeping our APIs up to date with quarterly versioning. But at the end of the day, from a maintenance standpoint, if it's going to cost you X amount of dollars just to maintain the thing, and if you're not proving explicitly that your conversion uplift, your top line revenue, whatever it be, insert metric X, is not outperforming what that cost is, then it just doesn't make sense. And so again, does like, from my experience, brands are obviously doing the math behind the scenes
Right.
and making that equation. But I think the other thing is and I'll this is where I have to give credit to the ecosystem in retail in general. Brands are very collaborative in nature, right? Like, at the end of the day, they're going to learn by partnering with us and vice versa. And this, again, this is not a Shopify thing. Like, this is just the nature of SaaS, where the more conversation, like, when I was at Spin Master and I was on the brand side, like, I was very motivated to speak to SaaS vendors because
Hmm.
they're on the precipice of what's changing in the space. Like, maybe there's a partnership that they're working on that I'm not aware
Right.
of that completely changes whether or not I wanted to build versus buy. And maybe, I had this master plan with my executive team to build this thing, and I have 9 months worth of documentation. I've been waiting up, and I already made the ask for capital, and I'm ready to go, and I've got my resources lined up. But at the end of the day, from an integrity standpoint, if I find out 9 months later off the cuff, right before I'm about to dive in, that, hey, like, this thing is going to cost a quarter of what it would have otherwise been. My customer experience is going to be like a 3% conversion uplift. Like, how could I not make that jump? So, I try and take that merchant view, but at the same time, I give pride to our ecosystem, because I really do feel like it's at the end of the day, it's never black and white. You could always make a case either way, but I think like that due diligence is key.
Yeah, and I can almost imagine kind of a Shopify kind of sidekick evolution where because you have access to so much data and because you're linked to all these third party applications where you can almost start suggesting whether if it's third party applications to customers or like help almost build kind of like an internal dev tool for all these brands, right? Where they can build all these customized things but within kind of Shopify platform and obviously all integrated. I won't. You don't have to comment on this just because I don't know, it may or may not be a future kind of function, but um, just going back to kind of the features, how brands are using AI. What are kind of the major use cases you have seen so far? And like I'm assuming, and I remember kind of Uber CEO kind of mentioning this, that they thought that kind of AI on the front end wasn't kind of ready yet, partially because of the speed, partially because of all these other kind of factors, like hallucination and such. But and so that's why Uber is really focused on kind of implementing AI more on the back end, coding, streamlining operations, et cetera, et cetera. How have you seen one brands use it, but then also kind of Shopify utilize AI?
Yeah. I would say, honestly, I would say more or less equal parts front end and back end at this stage.
Mm,
Again, it's moving so quickly that 3 or 4 months ago, it could have been a little bit of a different story, but it's just like, if, and again, this isn't about our tooling natively. This is, I'm looking holistically at AI in commerce and AI with Shopify as an umbrella term that encompasses, again, in the spirit of being an API first company. We've got our native AI tooling, we've got our third party tooling as well, or apps. But I'd say the other thing is, like, even if we don't have, so we have purpose built AI
mm,
tools, right? Like we have Sidekick, we have our MCP storefront now, which is incredible. We'll
right.
get into that. We have Shopify catalog. There's also, I think, this overarching philosophy at Shopify of, we have, like, native risk and fraud management. We have inventory management built into the
Hmm.
platform, and we have checkout, of course. And there's this AI lens that lives on top of all these different product teams now, right? Because it's not just like AI purpose built product. It's like, this is just a new way of working, and it's a baseline
Right.
expectation. And so I think that kind of dovetails into your question of, like, the back end side, because it really touches everything that has to do with
Hmm.
Shopify. So, you know, the latest edition we had, you look at something like AI block generation and themes, and to actually say out loud that, hey, you can just literally prompt your theme editor to build a block out of thin air, and it's just going to create a call to action for you, and you don't have to be a developer. That's incredible.
Right.
But to actually, like, the argument I would make there is, that's a use case that, at the same time, imagine that you are a developer. That doesn't mean that you don't have anything to do anymore. It actually
Right.
means that you're more inclined to do things that are even more impactful, right?
Right.
So, like, now, instead of taking 2 hours to write code and generate this block, it's like, hey, you built a proof of concept in 10 seconds. Now maybe you want to develop to augment that, or maybe you're actually happy with it and you can go build a really cool extension, like a UI extension for checkout. And so I think,
Right.
like, that paradigm shift is key. But I think, to answer your question, um, again, a long gamut of different applications, but AI block generation, as I just mentioned, the use of side, like, backend use of, like, any AI based Sidekick applications across different staff members. Obviously, storefront MCP. I'd say the product taxonomy is a massive piece. So that's been out
Mm,
for, I think it was released in at some point in 2024. So it has been some time now. But that is, in many ways, I think, a sleeper, in my opinion, in terms of,
mhm.
like, the impact it's had on the industry. Because what we did is, we took the power of AI and applied it to taxonomy in a way that, again, regardless of the size of a brand, you could be hundreds of millions of dollars in terms of your revenue generation. You could be a you know literally your first sale. But
Right.
the beauty of it is that, rather than trying to guess what your product taxonomy should be in a way that will optimize for discoverability and search and sales channel expansion, you're leaving that sophistication and matching to AI. And again, so you can be repositioned to work on other things. So I'd say, on the product creation, merchandising, PIM type of taxonomy work, I think there's a lot of back end benefits there. And then, quickly, on the front end, one of the things that I'm seeing is, a combination of using search, AI based search,
Mm, mhm.
CDP, and customer segments to literally change and reconfigure product assortment, collections rankings, and the makeup of a PDP or a collections page on the fly, based on
Mhm.
a customer. Right? That could be new versus existing. That could be, based on a plethora of different signals. But I'll just cap off on this note by saying, I think that is one of the most transformative applications of AI that I have seen in the retail e-com space. because it really supports this notion that this idea of a universally static site for all of your not even buyers but all of your visitors is fading away. And
Mm,
we speak about personalization ad nauseum. I'm sure you both have had many conversations about personalization before, but now we actually have the tools to back it up, and it's actually out in production in the wild with a ton of these brands. And so I think that's really cool. And for me, from a consumer side, if you recall, again, going back to the days of 2010 to 2020, and even to this day with advertisements, you have a lot of detractors. You have a lot of people that say, oh, I want to use an ad blocker. I don't like seeing these ads. But you actually, and I'm of this mindset, you have these folks that say, you know what? I want the ads because they're so good and they're so
right.
accurate that I actually feel like they're going to help me find products better than my own led discovery. And I would argue the same is this new era of AI based shopping, even on a direct to consumer storefront, where I'm okay to put my trust in AI because I actually know that the results it will yield are more likely to be a match for me than my self led search discovery.
No, that makes sense. I think one question I do want to kind of push on here, especially with this kind of AI personalization, commerce experiences. I think one of the potential issues that I think a lot of brands are going to face are just gathering kind of the sheer amount of data around user profiles, right? And I think like you can get some data around, in like purchases of your specific brands, and that Target does a great job of that. Like all these different brands with loyalty programs do a great job about that. How do you kind of figure out, you know like how to better personalize beyond kind of like, let's say, like new versus existing, or whether they've bought XYZ? Like I think to have like true personalization, maybe you have to understand customers across different brands, across different, and maybe not, maybe just beyond brands as well, like what kind of like home they have, like all these different data points. Is what's kind of the future there in terms of like how does how do brands kind of actually gather that data?
That's a wonderful question. I think we're still early days there, so I'm curious as well. The one thing I will say though is the yes, the use cases and breadth of customer segments have expanded thanks to AI. At the same time, I think with this new agentic shopping wave, like even the work that we're doing with Perplexity, again, buyer behavior has changed almost
Hmm.
seemingly overnight, right? And these folks that are now starting and finishing their purchase and buying journeys in the perplexities of the world and these LLMs, well, guess what they're doing there? They're having conversations, right? Like
Right.
it's sure search has evolved on storefronts to the point of being semantic and conversation led, conversational commerce. But if you're going to these LLMs, you're not saying, "Hey, I'm looking for a pair of black shoes, size 11." You may be, but for the most part, it's like, "Hey, I'm actually going on a camping trip this weekend,
Hmm.
and I need something to that." I need a new pair of whatever. It's a
Right.
human led interaction, right? And so
It's
I
a lot more
think that
context driven.
it's much more context driven. Absolutely.
Amazing. I think, yeah. So I think it's, yeah. Let's move on to this agentic commerce, because I think one, like all these platforms like a Perplexity, like a ChatGPT, are almost becoming storefronts in a way where they are kind of almost the new kind of gateway into a lot of these brands, and they kind of lead these brand discovery experiences. I think the other kind of experiences around agentic commerce that's often being talked about, AI shopping assistants and try on tools, styling tools, all these different things. um, how do you think the consumer shopping experience will change with AI? Like, obviously, you just talked about some of it with the perplexities, and obviously those, the amount of search volume on ChatGPT and perplexity for brands have increased dramatically.
Yeah, totally. So a few different things. So I think on the agentic front, I think it's literally happening before our eyes, and
Mhm.
even other LLMs, like they're building their own tooling that is facilitating like consumer led shopping. And I think it's a good example of how consumer behavior is changing is so the way I like to think about this is actually tied to search. Because if you think about LLMs, like it is in many ways a glorified version of search, right?
Mhm.
And so like search started out transactional and then it
Right.
became, semantic. And now we're moving towards agents. And we speak about agents a lot, but like in essence, what is an agent? An agent is we spoke about sophistication and its ability to understand the human aspect, the semantic aspect of what you're asking for. But the other side of the agent is being an orchestration layer, right? And
Mm,
so it's actually shifting the buyer funnel itself from the buyer to the agent, where it's agent led or agentic.
right.
And so what's what's surreal to me and what gets me up every morning is, I started at Shopify at the beginning of 2019, and I woke up with this assumption of what commerce was. And honestly, my lifetime, I didn't think we were going to get to a point, let alone almost 7 years in, where we're at now. And if anything, we launched, not to make a plug about our MCP storefront. I don't want it to be all about that, but the reality is like, we launched this thing this past editions, we announced it, and first of all, I think it's a phenomenal example of like why leaning into a platform like Shopify is going to future proof your business, because MCP it's not something that's been around for 5 years. Like, it's a
Right.
recent advancement, and so our ability to pivot in real time and lean into innovation like that is impressive. But again, back to your question, this idea that you can go to us, like, in theory, go to a storefront and have the agent lead the dance on the buyer journey itself, and actually condense or collapse that funnel for you and shepherd you as a consumer all the way to checkout and effectively
Mhm.
complete the vast majority of the funnel on your behalf while you sit back is mind-boggling to me. So I think that's something that, again, we announced at Editions, and we're starting to see those examples out in the wild in big numbers now. And I think that is a very exciting wave that I think is going to push commerce forward. The other piece quickly, though, is again generative AI. So
Mhm.
there's back end and front end elements to this, right? We spoke about the back end elements, like AI, block theme generation, and the product taxonomy pieces. But I think even like the front end, like, image manipulation, video
Mhm.
generation, things like that. Um, I think it's a flywheel where the more that it's already happening, but the more that we see it in production, the more normalized it's going to be, and the more
Mhm.
consumers are going to ask for it, which is going to put more pressure for businesses to adopt it. Which it's just rinse and repeat. So I mean, let's check back in 6 months, and I'm sure we're going to be pointing to something else, because that will all be normalized at that point.
Amazing. Just a few more questions. I think so for brands to kind of fully utilize AI. You know, obviously AI adoption for brands is can be very difficult. So what kind of like team structure have you seen, or do they have like different departments that focus on AI? Like, what's kind of the best practice that you have seen for brands to kind of adopt AI within their organizations?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's um, obviously dependent on the size of the business first and foremost, right? So, like, first, the size. If you're like a smaller organization, then obviously it's going to be a center of excellence. If you're a larger organization, then it still may be a center of excellence, but it may be obviously multifaceted. But then, so, like, the first order of business is size. Second criteria is shape, right?
Mhm.
Are you domestic? Do you have international um, spin-offs of your teams or equivalents?
Mhm.
But once you establish what your size and shape is, it's varying. I would say it's varying degrees of your. Yes, you may have an AI based SWAT team, but for the
Mhm.
most part, like, there are, like, we're seeing the emergence of chief AI officers now,
Right.
right? And like, it depends on the industry too, because it's one thing in commerce and fintech, like you're saying, for example, you're seeing a lot of chief AI officers. It depends on the consumer, the product service that you're catering to. But like, if we were to just, I'm, for all intents and purposes, focusing on like e-com, retail, that space, I'd say that it's a combination of, you take your typical let's call it a traditional org structure. So you've got
Mhm.
product man, and by the way, even if you take AI out of the equation, as you guys know, and I'm sure, as is the case with your organization, there's like many different ways to orchestrate. If you were to take 10 companies that are all doing like 50 mil in revenue, they may look completely different, right? So there's like different shapes even within the same size. Um, but but what I would say is, like, you're going to have your usual suspects. You're going to have small team of developers, maybe larger. You'll have product managers, designers, merchandisers, operations folks, what have you. You'll have finance, accounting. You'll have your usual suspects: IT, HR, talent, etc. But right now, what I'm seeing is you're going to have, again, either internally, a center of excellence that is focused on AI transformation.
Mhm.
You'll have an AI task force that is under, in often the case, a digital arm. So maybe you'll have like a
Mhm.
chief digital officer or CDO or even a CTO, CIO. So that's where we'll see a lot of it stemming from. Or maybe it's outsourced or it's a combination of the two. Maybe you're working with a global SI and you're doing an audit, but the idea is it has to be context specific, right? It's a
Mhm.
combination of using tooling from SaaS, using tooling that's externally publicly available. But then the last part, which is absolutely table stakes, is like you need to do a thorough audit of how are your teams working, because at the end
Mhm.
of the day, it's yes, you're using a Shopify, yes, you're using a Salsify, yes, you're using what a Bloomreach, whatever the case may be, but it's the combination of these different systems. If you're using like a Klaviyo, an Attentive, a Salsify, whatever, your unique journey in terms of like when you get up and you're a merchandising manager and you go through the motions of what your product's upload process looks like, or maybe it's your SMS campaign management, that is always going to look at least somewhat different from what maybe your
Mhm.
competitor is doing, right? And so I think there's that element of like you need a center of excellence to some degree that is going to do an audit, but then they're going to consult with each organization individually. And then the last point I would say is that you need a designated sponsor on each
Mhm.
respective organization, because the center of excellence, the COEs, they're never going to be fully capable and have the full empathy to understand exactly the ins and outs of what each department is doing. So I think that's where it kind of comes. You need a combination of the depth and the breadth to meet together, and that's kind of what we've seen been working.
Amazing. Three more kind of quick questions. So, you worked a lot with the Shopify leadership, and I think the two probably most public facing are probably your CEO Toby and then the president Harley. What kind of leaders are those two, and what kind of Toby or Harley story can you share?
Oh boy. I love a big part of why I work at Shopify is the leadership. Like I'm if it hasn't been evident by the last 52 minutes, I'm like I bleed green. And by the way, thank you very that I wish I was doing this in my office, because the is it called the Kuriko,
Uh,
the glass.
the Kiriko, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Kiriko, yeah, it's so I have that on my backdrop, and it's like the most beautiful thing. So thank you both. But I was just reminded of that because it like I bleed like I always say I bleed green, and like that Kiriko, it's like the perfect Shopify green. So it's very sentimental to me. Um, but a big reason is because again it's a founder led company like Toby. So to kind of dig in here, they're very much like yin and yang in the sense that Harley is that like extroverted like ball
Mhm.
of energy. He's our spokesperson. He gets everyone excited. Having worked for him personally, he's incredibly like he's very well versed in our product. He knows our mission. He knows the market. He understands the product. He's been around for pretty much the majority of
Mhm.
Shopify's history. But he's also he's quite technical, and it's interesting
Mhm.
because they just play to their strengths so well, but they also complement each other. And Toby goes without saying, he's you know like for a company like Shopify that has thousands of employees, he's I've never seen someone care so much and so intimately about the product, right?
Mhm.
Like we're a publicly traded company where we power globally, like just a huge lion share of the retail market, and he's intimately familiar with all of these different like the nooks and crannies of the platform. And if you look at a CEO, any CEO in the position of a company of that magnitude, they don't have to be, but it's nothing other like it's that only that's it could only be because of the passion, right? And so I actually just take inspiration from that, because I think a huge reason why we are where we are is because of how much of a well-oiled machine not only they are independently, but how much they riff off of each other. Um,
Mhm.
and I think that's what has allowed, even as we've gone up market to enterprise, that's what has allowed us to achieve the success we've had, is because you've had someone like Harley. They're kind of the personification of the platform in a way where like you have Harley who's meeting with all these enterprise customers, and he's with the media, and um, we're gathering feedback on what the market wants, and then we take it to Toby, and Toby's kind of leading the dance on internally on building the thing, and then we go to market and we get more feedback and we keep it going. So it's just been a breath of fresh air for me, and it's something I know we're just getting started as far as I'm concerned. So
Amazing. Um, in terms of I know you work with a lot of Shopify brands, and you probably don't want to be too biased here, but what is kind of a current Shopify brand that you love buying from? What and when what makes that brand stand out?
Okay, okay. I there's one that I like. I haven't had the opportunity to work too closely with them, but there's a brand called Patrick Asaroff. It's actually a Canadian company. I believe they're based out of Toronto, somewhere in Ontario, in Canada. Um, I love that brand so much. I feel like half of my wardrobe is, is Patrick Asaroff. It's like it's in the quiet luxury space. So it's just
Mm,
it's um if you think about like a t-shirt and you just want the best quality t-shirt with the best of Pima cotton that you can buy, like in my eyes, that's, I mean, they're up there. They're up there with the who's who of like luxury. So I love what they stand for. It's like everyday basics, from your swim trunks to your button-down
mhm.
shirts to your whatever. They've got it. It's men's and women's, kids, and it's just phenomenal brand.
And then kind of final question for me, your recent trip out to Japan, beyond kind of meeting kind of the Shopify team in Japan and meeting kind of brands and customers there, you know, just Japan in general, as a tourist, as a person who just kind of visited, what was your favorite thing?
Oh,
And
well,
also, what would you bring from Japan to the US to sell?
ooh, that's a good question. Um, so the food was just incredible. I mean,
Mm,
like, not to be cliche, but I think it's the culture, which it's the people. I had the trip of a lifetime there. I know, meeting you both and the merchants and even the Shopify colleagues that I have. It was the trip of a lifetime, and I think it's the people. It's built on a culture of respect, on tradition and history. The food is phenomenal. I think if I was to sell one thing, it would definitely be matcha. We bought,
mm.
I don't know, probably 6 or 7 tins of matcha, and I deliberately purchased from like as many different vendors as I could. And I'm like going through a withdrawal now because I'm trying to find good quality matcha, and it
Right.
just, I don't know if it's placebo or what it is, but in my head I'm like, I just can't get the same thing as in Japan. So definitely start with that.
Got it. Got it.沼田さんなんか他にあります？大丈夫ですか？
哲夫に大体聞いてもらったんですけど、最後一個聞いてみたいのが、なんか、このコマースにおいて、まあ、ショッピングでもいいんですけど、その5年後に、その Shopify が、まあ、解決しているであろう、今大きな課題となっているもの、なんか、今これは、なんか、例えば我々ブランドとしてもすごい課題だけど、5年後には解決してるんじゃないかみたいなものが、なんか、あれば、ちょっと聞い
それちなみに
てみたいです。
エンタープライズ向けっていう意味合いでですか？
エンタープライズでもいいし、まあ
特に。
逆に消費者が Shopify によって解決するものでもいいです。なんか、いずれにせよ、この今、ショッピングにおいて課題となっている、ボトルネックになっているものが、Shopify によって何がその5年後になくなっているかみたいなことをちょっと聞いてみたいです。
So in 5 years time, what kind of current problem that you see in whether if it's within kind of Shopify's current ecosystem, or if it's just the kind of purchasing e-commerce buying experience, or yeah, just kind of the buying experience in general, that you think Shopify will have solved within 5 years.
Oof, it's good. That's a great question. I think it's going to be, I'll give you generic and specific. So generically, I think it's, again, I said before, we're a commerce OS operating system, and we're going to continue to be a step ahead of where customers are. At the end of the day, we're going to empower businesses to meet their customers where they are and where they will be, right? And today it's agentic selling. Um, I imagine it will be some iteration of that. I think, like, we're not, there's early signs of like this agentic mesh and like buyer facing agents and the brokering of agents, and I think that's a really exciting future to think about, where a lot of commerce is actually automated and
Mm,
transacted and brokered, right, like in this multi-agent world. So I'm excited to see how that unfolds. I think, um, I personally think that storefronts will always have a place, because
mm,
it's funny, like, you look at marketplaces, and when marketplaces first emerged, like on the internet in the past 15, 20 years, a lot of folks in the early 2000s pointed to websites and said, oh, they're dead, what's the
mhm,
point, I can just get everything I need on a marketplace. But you can't tell your story the same way you can on a marketplace as on a direct to consumer website, right? Like that is a canvas. And I understand from a business standpoint, all the, you have margins on your side, you have the customer like marketing rights on your side. Like there's so much upside to a storefront. But then the obvious question is like, what's in it for the customer if the convenience of marketplace is there?
Right.
Well, the answer to that is it's clear from the data, like from the fact that people still transact with websites, that they want the storytelling, they want that,
Right.
they want the experience, right? And like at the end of the day, I think that's what we spoke about before about build versus buy. And I think where sometimes it makes sense to build. And like a good example is headless is if you have a front end that is like and I'm not like Liquid is incredible and makes sense for so many different brands. But in some cases, if you have a front end experience that is like so wacky and so unique and so out of the ordinary, like that's fun, right? Like that's fun. And that's what retail is all about. It's about having fun, being unique, and being on brand, whatever that brand is for you. And so I think at the end of the day, I just think we're going to continue to. I don't think we're going to be subtracting. I think we're just going to be adding. There's going to be modifications along the way in terms of like how we're orchestrating. I'm sure in terms of like what the commerce makeup looks like, but we haven't skipped a beat. So I think, listen, today it's D2C, social, retail, B2B, agentic selling, mobile apps, marketplaces, like the list goes on and on. I think the problem that we'll solve is continuing to iterate on that master vision that we have of just expanding our reach for our merchants as much as we can.
Amazing. Well, Matt, I know we're over time now. Thank you so much for today. It's been an absolute pleasure. And then we can't wait to come visit you in Toronto.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Excited to have you both. Thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Amazing.